All right, well, good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Madeline Smith. I am the Director of Higher Education here at the Hunt Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Post-Secondary Pathways webinar titled White House Initiative on HBCUs, Past, Present, and Future. So before we begin, I would like to remind you of a few housekeeping items. The webinar does include closed captions. We will be using the Zoom Q&A function today, so please do submit your questions as you have them. And if you'd like to view the webinar, again, you can view it live on our Facebook or our YouTube page. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Winn Decker, our Deputy Director and today's moderator. Winn?
Great, thank you, Madeline. And thanks everyone for coming today. We're excited to have you here. We're excited to have this conversation about HBCUs, particularly as we're in Black History Month, but historically Black colleges and universities have been making an impact since the early 19th century. We know there's over 100 accredited HBCUs, both public and private, in the US, but mostly concentrated in 19 states, the District of Columbia, and the US Virgin Islands. HBCUs enroll about 300,000 students, approximately 80% of whom are African American and 70% who are from low-income families. These institutions are top producers of Black STEM graduates, Black medical doctors, veterinarians, and they graduate more low-income students at a higher rates than predominantly white institutions. Not to mention that these institutions, their graduates, have a major influence on culture in terms of music, fashion, the arts, and more. But we know the impacts of HBCUs are not only academic and social, but they're also fiscal. For each job created on an HBCU campus, another 1.3 public and private sector jobs are created because of HBCU-related spending. So as we come into this discussion about the HBCU initiative at the White House and similar work at the state level in Tennessee, it's critical to remember the role HBCUs have in the past, present, and the future of not only education, but culture and society in America. So I'm excited to introduce our speakers today. We've got a great panel. First, we have Dr. Dietra Trent, who's the Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity through historically Black colleges and universities. Dr. Trent's a proud alumni also of Hampton University, an HBCU, and she is Virginia's former Secretary of Education. Dr. Trent, thanks for being here today. Also joining us, we have Dr. Brittany Mosby, Director of HBCU Success from the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, and is also a proud graduate of Spelman College, another illustrious HBCU. So Dr. Mosby, thanks for being here as well. Well, you've heard way too much from me, so I'm ready to dive into this conversation with you all. But I want to come to you first, Dr. Trent. Back in your time in Virginia is when you started to engage with Javed, our CEO and president here, and so we appreciate that relationship. As you've moved into your role for the White House Initiative on HBCUs, why is the work paramount to the success in the nation at large, the work that you do?
So thank you so much, Dr. Decker. I appreciate this opportunity to be here today. I also just want to thank the Hunt Institute. As you mentioned, Dr. Siddiqui and I have been working together for some time now, and he was probably the first person to call, if not one of the first persons to call me once I was appointed. And so I really appreciate the fact that we've had a long-standing working relationship. But beyond that, the Hunt Institute over the last 12 months, which is how long I've been at the department, has been an incredible partner. We were so happy to be able to recognize you during the conference, mostly because of your partnership with us, but then also because just all of the work that you do in terms of equity in education, and in particularly what you do for our HBCUs around the country, really elevating them to a position, to a much higher and more important issue within state governments as well. So we really appreciate that partnership. As I focus on the federal level, you guys are out there working hard and focusing on the state level. So we really appreciate that partnership. So in terms of why these universities are important, there's so many reasons why they're important. I would have to say first and foremost that, and it start with where you kind of, you alluded to earlier, and that is just the fact that we are institutions that have been underfunded, undervalued for such a long time, but yet we continue to like produce in amazing ways, right? We have just to give you a little bit of what you just said, we are 3% of post-secondary education in the country. We enroll about 10% of college students. That's equates to a little over 300,000 students per year. And despite being undervalued and under resources, HBCUs continue to graduate barrier breaking public servants, scientists, artists, lawyers, doctors, you name it. We 17% of all African-American students earning a bachelor's degree, 17% of all African-American students earning a bachelor's degree attended an HBCU. 25% of Black graduates earning STEM degrees graduated from an HBCU. 40% of Congressional Black Caucus members, 50% of Black engineers and teachers, 70% of Black doctors and dentists, 75% of Black officers in the Air Force, in the armed forces, 85% of Black federal judges and PhDs all started at an HBCU. And last but not least, 100% of Black and female vice presidents of the United States graduated from an HBCU. So we continue to just really produce these outstanding individuals who actually contribute so much to our society in such incredible ways. Every year, our HBCUs contribute or generate nearly $15 billion a year in economic impact annually. And we create over 134,000 jobs in the communities that we serve. And so when you think about why it's important for us to continue to support these universities, it's one, because of their contributions, but the second and most, probably one of the most important things is that we're at a place in our society right now where diversity, we have to understand the importance of diversity. We have to understand that what we've been doing so far has not worked. And we need diverse voices, experiences, and opportunities around the table when we deal with some of the major issues of our country and in our society. So it's critical for us as a nation to continue to invest in our HBCUs and continue to open these doors of opportunity so that we can have the best and brightest from all perspectives at the table. You know, when we deal with our issues, we want everybody to bring their true selves, their true experiences, because when we do that, then we can get to the very heart of how we solve some of the most difficult issues in our society. So I'm going to stop there because I can continue to talk about HBCUs, but I'm not going to hog Dr. Mosby's time.
Well, and we'll certainly come back for some more specifics on particularly the economics portion. I think that you hit on, Dr. Trent. Appreciate those kind words about the Hunt Institute, and we're appreciative of the partnership. And for the audience, I know Dr. Trent named a lot of statistics in there. We'll try to capture some of that in our key takeaways that we'll publish on our website as well as on Twitter. So if you didn't capture those, we'll try to grab those for you as well. But I love what you said, Dr. Trent, about those next steps and acknowledging that what we've done around diversity hasn't worked the way it was intended. You know, I think in particular, this conversation is critically important as we think about affirmative action and what might be next for affirmative action and how we ensure diverse campuses, because we know that experience is critical. So thanks for naming that. And we'll come back a little bit more of the economics. But first, I want to come to you, Dr. Mosby. Can you tell us a little bit about your job? So your role, we've had some conversations about this, but your role says that really mimics what Dr. Trent and her position is doing at the federal level. And so can you tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing with THEC and to help ensure sustainability of HBCUs, particularly in Tennessee?
Sure, absolutely. And good afternoon to everyone. And thank you, Dr. Decker, for having for having me. And I echo Dr. Trent's sentiments of being that support in the background too, for a lot of the work that's going on and the exciting things that we have here in Tennessee. So I call myself the head cheerleader for HBCUs in the state of Tennessee. And I take that role seriously. I serve as a liaison between state agencies and the 7 public and private HBCUs across the state of Tennessee. Been in this role for about 5 years now. And as I have delved into higher education policy, what has become crystal clear is that so much of investment and the value proposition and really the convincing for the case of higher education, HBCUs in particular, happens at the state and local levels. And so what we're able to do, or what my goal is to create the best policy environment possible for our HBCUs in the state of Tennessee. I think an important part of this discussion, as we think about HBCUs as a diverse set of institutions, not a monolith. In Tennessee, we range from American Baptist College, which is a smaller religious-based 4-year institution, to Meharry Medical College, a national powerhouse, and has really come to the forefront for minority public health and public health policy during the pandemic. There is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to supporting HBCUs. Each one has different students, different needs, and really a completely different outlook and outcomes that they contribute to the state. As the director of HBCU success, it's my job to really keep my finger on the pulse of what the institutions are doing, what their needs are, and again, how to create a higher education policy environment that is most conducive to the success of those institutions. 6 of our HBCUs here in Tennessee are private institutions, and so it's not always directly an answer of state appropriations or direct funding. When we talk about support, we have to broaden our scope in terms of what that means. And so one of the bullet points of the strategic plan in Tennessee is administrative support and capacity building. So as the higher ed coordinating body, that means ensuring that HBCUs are included in accreditation discussions, financial aid compliance discussions, those sort of operations conversations that happen at the state level. We want to make sure HBCUs are aware of and involved in too, because keeping the lights on is one of the base needs of the Maslow's pyramid. And we have to attend to all of them to have institutions that are truly sustainable and thriving. So I think I can also get on a soapbox and talk forever. So I'll pause here.
That was great, Dr. Mosby. And well, first off, thanks for naming the variety of the HBCU institutions. I think a lot of this conversation oftentimes focuses on those large land grant universities and the systemic underfunding, but we know those private, those liberal arts HBCUs play such a critical role as well in the nation. And the other part you named about the capacity building and ensuring the sustainability, the budget ask. And so I might bring a question back to you a little bit about the infrastructure maybe. On a previous podcast, we talked about like some HBCUs trying to become Research One institutions and what types of systems were needed for things like that. So I might bring a question back to you about that just to think about. But before we go to the next question for Dr. Trent, I do want to remind the audience, we have a Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom webinar feature. So please use that. We'll get your questions out in just a moment for these 2 great panelists. But Dr. Trent, I want to come back to you about that economics portion. We know HBCUs have a rich history, but it's often not recognized, particularly around the workforce development and economics piece. I think you said HBCUs brought $15 billion with a B dollars to the economy last year. So can you talk to us more about the role HBCUs
Okay, it looks like Dr. Decker is frozen. Brittany, can you hear me? So I'm gonna talk
I
a
can hear
little
you.
bit
Go
more.
ahead.
I'll talk a little bit more about the economic. So yeah, so we did a study. The United Negro College Fund commissioned a study, I guess about 2 years ago, and they looked at the economic impact of HBCUs across the board. And they determined, and in that study, it was determined that HBCUs have annually bring in over $15 billion a year. Okay. Over $15 billion a year to the communities in which they serve, and also over 134,000 jobs in those communities. If you just kind of look at it, I mean, you know, we can look at, they do this despite the fact that they have been, and I don't want to seem like I'm harping on this, but it is a fact that they have been underfunded and under-resourced, not only by the federal government, but also by state government. States have not been a really good partner when it comes to our HBCUs. Yet, in spite of all of that, we've been able to really punch above our weight, really produce outstanding public servants and scientists and doctors and lawyers. So, you know, when you think about the true value of an HBCU, it's really hard to, in my mind, to really calculate, because these are institutions that have over 70 or 75% Pell eligible first generation students. These are institutions that very often have acceptance rates of up to 75-80%. That means that most students who apply to these schools are admitted, even if they don't have, you know, the GPA, even if they don't have the SAT or the ACT scores, they are admitted. I looked at the acceptance rate of the average acceptance rate of an HBCU is 70%. Of the average acceptance rate of Ivy Leagues are 7%. And so that is just, you can really tell the difference between our schools are access schools for the most part. We take those students who traditionally have not been well prepared for college, and they turn out to be people like me who, you know, I was the first generation. I was on Pell, you know, so my story could have been a lot different if it were not for the education that I received at an HBCU. And we can do this over and over and over again. You can look at Alabama or Florida. Florida has 4 HBCUs, and every year they produce $833 million in that economy. I have it broken down. North Carolina's HBCU, the NC10, 10 HBCUs, they generate just under $2 billion. So like $1.8 billion. And so, you know, we continue to just grow. I think they lost Wi-Fi. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think our hosts are trying to get back in.
Should I continue to talk?
I think so.
Brittany, why don't I ask you a question?
You can ask me a question. There we go.
Are you guys working on a are you all working on a caucus, an HBCU caucus in Tennessee? And how is that coming along? I know that's an area in which the Hunt Institute has been working with a number of states on, and I'm really happy about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in Tennessee, the legislature has not been, but I do know that in Georgia, there is plans and action around formulating an HBCU caucus. And one of my colleagues, Denise Smith with the Century Foundation, has been involved in that. I think there is great value to having a caucus body in the State House that is sort of the go-to and keenly aware of the issues that are facing HBCUs. Because like I said, I think it comes back to that being able, the legislators who are agile enough to recognize policy window when it opens and having a solution ready. I tell the story here in Tennessee, you know, it's we are the first state and currently the only state, and it's because Representative Harold Love at the time had been involved in not just working with Tennessee State University, but examining solutions. And when the time came, our Republican supermajority happened to be split over a bill or an issue, and they came to the Democrats and we're doing the lobbying that happens. And Representative Love, in his wisdom, saw the policy window open and said, sure, we can help you, but we've got this HBCU legislation that we would like to get passed. And truly, that's how it happened. And so an HBCU caucus, I think, is a genuine asset that can be able to support and advocate for HBCUs in that agile way, in that finger on the pulse kind of way, the way things can happen and change at a moment's notice in the State House. So we don't have one yet in Tennessee, but I recommend other folks involved in state policy to take a close look at North Carolina, but also at Georgia, who have been recently working to get an HBCU caucus underway. And I believe there's some recent publications in the Chronicle around the work of the Georgia HBCU caucus. So yeah, a tremendous asset for HBCUs in the legislative arm, for sure.
Yeah, and let me just mention, if I can, I think one of the strongest things that the HBCU initiative has been around since President Carter. He was the first president to sign an executive order establishing it. And every president since then has signed an executive order establishing the White House Initiative on HBCUs. What has made this administration so different is, one, the executive order in which the current president signed really elevated the office and gave it a lot more power and a lot more stature, I think. So I always tell people I have three very powerful weapons that I have that I can use, right? So the first one is the executive order, and it really does align very well with the Partners Act. Mm-hmm. The Partners Act is a piece of legislation in the federal government. It was passed in 2020 by the HBCU caucus, and that's over 100 members, Republicans and Democrats across the board in every state. And they all came together and say, let's do something for our HBCUs. Let's try to level the playing ground. And so that Partners Act is requiring all of our federal agencies. We have 37 federal agencies that I work with every single day. And it requires them to submit plans to my office and to both branches of Congress on an annual basis. And they have to outline how they're going to create more opportunities for HBCUs and how they're going to eliminate barriers for HBCUs. And, there might be some out there who would question, why do we still need this? I would say that in 2019, all 102 HBCUs combined received under $400 million in R&D that year, combined across the federal government. Mm-hmm. That same year, Johns Hopkins received $2.6 billion. And so that happens that has been systemic and it's happened over and over and over again. That's why this Partners Act, which was really passed because of the caucus, the HBCU caucus, is so important.
Mhm.
So today, for the first time ever, the Department of Defense, particularly the Department of the Air Force, just announced that it has established the first HBCU-led university affiliated research center. So it's called a UARC. It is the first one in the history of this country. They have committed $90 million.
That is amazing.
Howard is leading that, and it's in Howard is actually leading that, and I think there is 7 total HBCUs that are included in that UARC. And so they're going to be doing research for the Air Force on tactical autonomy.
Wow.
And when they talked about that, they talked about exactly what we've been talking about. And that is, it is important from a national security perspective to have these diverse voices at the table. So, you know, I'm excited by what the Hunt Institute is doing in terms of these helping our states think about how do we come together in a more collaborative way to make sure that our HBCUs are receiving the resources, not only that they need, but the resources that they're due.
Yes.
And have, you know, for so long. So we have our host back, so I'm gonna not hog the conversation anymore. You are.
Well,
There you go.
There we go. First off, my incredible apologies. We had a Wi-Fi outage at the Institute. So it was not just my computer, all computers were down, but we survived it. I think it maybe explains what the Hunt Institute is hoping to do in our work with HBCUs in a weird way. You know, we really like to provide the space, the platform, and then ultimately raise up the resource experts and the folks that are doing the great work. So first off, appreciate y'all keeping the conversation going. I heard a few things, so maybe I'll recap those really quickly if I missed anything, and then we'll go to some questions, get back to y'all. But you know, this conversation about the underfunding, particularly around research and development, you know, so critical in so many facets, including, you know, retaining great faculty. And so just thinking about this idea of driving that research and innovation and giving folks the opportunity and chances. And, you know, one of the things we know about diversity in CEO and boardrooms is having a diverse group of people around the table, having those conversations leads to more innovation, leads to more growth. And it's the same thing in our research facilities at higher education institutions. So appreciate that. Also heard the Georgia stuff get named. We're super excited to see what Senator Halpern is doing down there, not only with the HBCU caucus, but also some of these economic overlay districts and what's coming with this idea of promoting the economy and the communities around the HBCUs. So we'll continue to track some of that. I missed some of the questions, and I don't know if you all went there, but I would love to come. Dr. Trent mentioned that this position is an executive order over and over again. So one of the things I'm hearing is we need to institutionalize a lot of this work, right? Put it into policy, pass it through legislation. So maybe you both could talk about, if you haven't already, the future of where you want your work to go. Maybe when you look up at the end of your time in this role or 3 to 5 years out, where do you envision the work being at that point? Brittany, if you don't mind, we'll come to you first, and then we'll come to you, Dr. Trent.
Sure. Yeah. I think I will have a you know, sit down on my bed successfully when every state has at its top level a position dedicated to HBCU success coordination and air traffic control between the state, local governments, and the HBCUs. Truly, I think that because there's such a diversity of institutions, and because each state handles higher education in a different way, each state's higher education space looks different, you really have to have someone who specializes for the state in navigating that with and for the HBCUs. And so, you know, I've taken the show on the road to the best of my ability, and really working to encourage other states to not necessarily replicate what we've done here in Tennessee, but certainly to consider how it fits into their state framework of supporting institutions. And so, yeah, I think success looks like, having as many folks as possible in these types of positions. And Dr. Decker, to your point, codified in state statutes. Similar to what we have, similar to the way the executive order is at the federal level, sort of a governmental mandate to support the HBCUs.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. And Representative Love, and putting a lot of that work in to institutionalize some of the work you're doing. So we're excited to see that. Dr. Trent, same question to you. Where do you envision the future of this work heading?
So I'm going to say my biggest desire is to have a Dr. Mosby in every state where there are HBCUs, because as she mentioned, you really need someone like her to really help them navigate through all of the processes. And I mean, I know we said we're going to talk about infrastructure, but when we talk about infrastructure at HBCUs, we're not just talking about deferred maintenance or buildings or new dorms or what have you. We're talking about telecommunications, that infrastructure, the need for telecommunications, the need for new buildings and new dorms, but also the need for additional bodies, right? A lot of people on our campuses are doing 2 and 3 jobs because they have to, right? They have to. They don't have the luxury of just having one job where they can totally focus just on that. And so it is important that we have people at my level, at the federal level, as well as the state level, to continue to advocate on behalf of our HBCUs. And not just advocate on behalf of them, but help people understand the importance of including them and the importance of what they offer and value, all that they offer. Again, we cannot out-compete. We cannot out-innovate other countries until we bring all of our diverse voices, experiences, opportunities to the table on some of these major issues. And so as I think about how I want to leave this place and how I want to leave HBCUs, this job, I want to be able to look back over this time and see where and how I move the needle for each and every one of my universities. I want to be able to say that, because of the work that we have done, our federal government is now doing business differently with our HBCUs. Our federal government is now seeing our HBCUs differently. But not only that, from a private sector as well. I work very closely with a lot of private sector and organizations and companies that have reached out to me to form partnerships with our HBCUs. And so that there's a lot of goodwill out there. There's a lot of good opportunity out there, but there's also lack of infrastructure at our universities to be able to really take advantage of all of the opportunities. So
yeah, Dr. Trent, I want to just add on to what you said and kind of tie it back to something else. You mentioned how Johns Hopkins, billions with the B. I also imagine that Johns Hopkins has offices for government affairs, for, they've got folks whose job it is to, and then I look at a college like Lane College here in Jackson, Tennessee. You're right. Everybody there is wearing 3 hats, and they can't spare a person to be sort of their governmental affairs only person. They've got to deal with FAFSA verification. They've got to deal with getting students into classes and making sure they're all housed adequately, and so kind of tying it all together, why positions like ours are needed. goes back to that basic under-resourced foundation, which is other schools have even resources to ask for money, right? I think in higher education, we got to remember that even the machines that ask for grants, that administer, sponsored programs and dollars, that is all, that's an entire office. And larger schools will have multiple people doing that, whereas a smaller school, it might be your chemistry associate professor who is running the entire grant. And so they don't have, the backup and the support to successfully navigate those waters. So it's Dr. Trent, to your point, it's all interconnected and all related. And it comes back to, stretching, making the dollar out of 15 cents and stretching and doing more with less. And we cannot discount the fact that in the higher education space, HBCUs have a starting line further back in multiple dimensions beyond just enrollment and funding.
Yeah, and I also just want to add to that, Dr. Mosby, and that is, for folks who might be listening in, what is so significant about this when we talk about, the underfunding of HBCUs, and just giving you the 2019 data. I know people think, well, of course, Johns Hopkins got that much because they have all this great research going on, and they have the medical school, and they're doing this incredible research. And that is all true. I am not taking anything from them. They are one of the best universities that we have in this country. But it is also true that when you have these federal grants, you are able to use 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 and 40% of that money towards administrative costs, right? So that means they can buy the best researchers, they can buy the best instruments, they can buy the best buildings. And that has happened over and over and over again. And as our universities have been left out, and that's why it's such a hard chance. It's so difficult for us to catch up, because this has happened for so long, and it continues to happen. Mm-hmm. And so, it's critical that we really do our best to try and even that playing field.
Yeah, it's a positive feedback loop for the schools like Johns Hopkins, and it becomes a negative feedback loop for the institutions that were denied access from the outset, for sure.
Exactly.
That's so great in terms of the content that you're providing us to really think through what that sustainability of an HBCU looks like, and naming, that infrastructure stuff, because you're correct. The Wi-Fi, some of those basic things that we don't think about when we walk on, that flagship university's campus, the moment you step on that internet connects, right? And providing some of those same opportunities at HBCUs. I maybe want to zoom us in just a tiny bit to the student. And so as we're thinking about an HBCU, oftentimes the question we get from legislators is why does the student want to choose an HBCU? And a lot of that is around the student supports, the opportunity, the investment that they get in their selves. And so I just wanted to ask about some of those student support services that are so critical at HBCUs. So Dr. Mosby, can we come to you first, and then Dr. Trent will come your way?
Sure. Yeah, I chose Spelman College, #1 HBCU for 14 years. We're not counting, but I chose my university, my Spelman College experience because I wanted a place where I would not be othered or relegated to a corner or a building on the campus. Vanderbilt University is where I got my doctorate, and I love Vanderbilt. I think they're doing some great work around diversity and inclusion. However, Vanderbilt was not built for me. Spelman College was, and that's evident in every aspect of university culture. Vanderbilt having sort of the Black Student Union is a great thing and a great investment on the part of the university. But at Spelman, everywhere was the Black Student Union. And I think we cannot underestimate, especially this younger generation, Gen Z, the TikTok generation. They are so connected through social media that they're going to campuses for an in-person, for a in real life experience. And they're choosing HBCUs, again, because they're centered, and they're centered from the beginning. And so I think that's one of the major benefits of choosing an HBCU. The other thing that I think is baked into the secret sauce, if you will, of HBCU success is the bonding and the formation of community between faculty, staff, and students. And so, whereas at a non-HBCU, advising might be something that students and faculty are required to do, at an HBCU, advising and mentoring is something that organically rises because of interactions. And it's more of a transformational relationship than a transactional relationship. And I think it's because people on both sides of the table have unique experiences that they bring to bear in that relationship that forms into a mentor relationship, rather than just here's your classes, here's what you need to do to graduate, go forth and be successful. At an HBCU, there's inevitably more than that. How your mama doing? Did you go to class today? You know, and that care can't be taught and can't be, again, underestimated as a reason why students continue to choose HBCUs. You know, in a higher education market now that is inundated with choice, students can go online, they can go part-time, they can go at home, in-state. I think it speaks volumes that HBCUs are still a top choice for students, and it's because of the value add that they provide. And students recognize that in addition to, you can get a credential anywhere, you could, but a credential from an HBCU has a value add of civic engagement, volunteerism. I think all of us HBCU grads can point to different points in our academic community or our academic journey that were co-curricular, but formative in sort of our professional journeys in terms of passion and really doing work that is meaningful. So yeah, that's my answer on why HBCUs remain relevant and why we are really compelled as HBCU graduates. We can't lift the ladder up. We got to make sure that ladder remains down for others to follow in our footsteps.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that I can actually top that. She really articulated that really well. What I will do is just offer that, you know, as when I started this job last year, one of the things that I tried to do in Hunt Institute was really, really helpful in this, and that is to get around to as many of the universities as I can. And, you know, basically to talk to the administration, to talk to students, to talk to researchers there, just to see how we can better support them. I will tell you that the student piece of this is the most valuable, is most valuable to me than any of the other conversations that I've had. I was at Clark, Atlanta, and one of the students there told me that she was in her senior year. And this was second semester senior year. First semester senior year, she registered for a class that she needed for graduation. She was the only student to register for that class that year. And instead of the faculty member counseling the class, she had the student come to her office for class. She said she would put on a pot of tea and they would sit there and have class, just the two of them. She said her sister, on the other hand, was attending a PWI, or predominantly white institution, had the exact same thing happen to her. And instead, the class was canceled. And so she ended up graduating a year later. This student from Clark told me that from that point on, every decision she makes will be based on whether or not that faculty member would approve it or not. You know, for that faculty member to take that kind of a interest in her, for her to put that so much time into this one student, you know, that is life-changing for her. Even if she came from the best of best families, she now has a very, very high standard that she's gonna try to reach each and every single day. I had another student that told me in North Carolina in the NC10, this is a kid who, he was an African-American male, is an African-American male. I think he had a GPA of like a 3.4 or something. He applied to 7 schools and 1 HBCU. Only the HBCU accepted him. Only the HBCU. How is it that only an HBCU would accept a Black male in society today with a 3.4 GPA? That to me is crazy. This kid has gone on to be like president of this and president, like he's going to be huge, right? Because of what the experience that he's had on that HBCU campus. So when you talk about why HBCUs and why these kids go on and we go on to be leaders in our profession, it's because leadership, service, compassion is embedded in everything we do on that campus. We are expected to lead. We are expected to serve. We don't have the luxury of going on and getting a degree and thinking, you know, oh wow, this is a good life for us. No, we were put in our positions and we received this opportunity with the understanding that we are to go out and serve. So, I mean, I would say to particularly any African-American student, but not just African-American students, any student who is interested in having a welcoming environment, or an accepting environment, a nurturing environment, to consider an HBCU.
Thank you both for that. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate everything you named, and it's so important in terms of how we think about the ways we engage with legislators, with policymakers, with philanthropists. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about was the importance of an unrestricted versus restricted gift at an HBCU, and this ability to use it for the essential things that an HBCU wants to use the funds for. You know, something else I think we heard in North Carolina was this conversation, just like you named, Dr. Trent, about wanting to get on campuses. And as the HBCU caucus has grown, we're hearing from more legislators. Oh, I've seen this one campus, or I've seen this one, but we've got 10. You know, how do we get them to those other 7, 8, 9 institutions? So as we start to wrap up, just one final question for the both of you as you kind of think about where we're headed. As people leave this and go back into their work, either, you know, at an HBCU or a PWI or in the nonprofit area, what do you want them to carry with them? What do you want them to take from this conversation so that they can feel like they have been empowered to now make the difference that they want to make from this conversation? We'll come to you first, Dr. Mosby, and we'll let you finish this out, Dr. Trent.
That's a great question. I think I would say that HBCUs as an institution, I'm looking at something that just popped up in the chat, and I kind of want to speak to this, if that's okay too, and in answering your question. HBCUs are institutions that need our support. We've been talking about the positives and sort of the elevator pitch for HBCUs, but it is certainly the case that these are institutions that are dealing with very real infrastructure capacity issues. To the point of the comments about delayed response times, or not having all of the amenities of other schools, or, Dr. Decker, like you said, you step on the campus of the flagship and your internet connects automatically. At an HBCU, that's not the case. I think what this says to me, what this does to me, and from where I sit, is it makes me double down on how important my role and my support is, because it's what we have to remember is that at an HBCU, it is not from a lack of care. It is not, I think it is a common narrative to frame HBCUs as, oh, well, they're lazy, they don't try, they got people who are just sitting around not doing their jobs. And remember, this is the same narrative that they put on enslaved peoples for keeping us enslaved. So we cannot fall into that same rhetoric of HBCUs are not successful because of themselves. We have to remember that it is a systemic problem that HBCUs are facing, and it takes the support of an entire village, of the entire community, to bring them out of that. And so you have to remember that when we are facing issues at HBCUs, when we are dealing with things like that, that it is not something that we just shake our head at. It's something that we say, okay, what can we do to help? At some of my colleges here in Tennessee, the registrar is the financial aid director, is, the student success person, and gets paid one salary for all of that. And in the same way, in our day-to-day jobs, you might look at something and say, they're not paying me to do that. At HBCUs, they don't have that luxury. They don't have that ability to say, no, I'll let someone else do it. It's students that need them, and true, some things fall between the cracks. But I think support for HBCUs cannot end at Spelman. It can't end at Howard. It can't end at the schools at the top of the list. Support for HBCUs, if you say that you're a supporter, you got to support them all, and you got to support them where they are. And in our conversations, we have to do a better job of saying we're supporting these institutions not because they do or don't deserve based on their actions, but because of the outputs, and bringing it back to the students, right? That we can't withhold dollars support because the institution has a cracked infrastructure, right? That sort of penal negative reinforcement is never going to help anyone. So to wrap it up, sorry. I guess my takeaway is that HBCUs need our support. They need broad support. They need it from the federal level, and they need it from the state level. And I think that's what makes me so excited about this conversation that we're having today with Dr. Trent, is that we're beginning to recognize that it takes more than just the UNCF. It takes more than just the Thurgood Marshall College Fund to be advocates for HBCUs. We need those voices at all levels and across all states that are supportive.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brittany. Dr. Trent, I'll let you have the last word on this.
Well, I agree with everything that Brittany just said. I think to wrap it up, it takes a village. It really does take a village. And I would say that, I need everybody out there supporting HBCUs. I need everybody out there talking about the great things that HBCUs are doing. I need everybody out there advocating on behalf of our HBCUs. If you're an attorney, I need you to reach out to your HBCU and say, how can I help you? If you're an accountant, reach out to your HBCU and say, how can I help you? If you're part of an organization, the National Black Engineers, the National Black Accountants, the National whatever you are, reach out to HBCUs and say, we have these talents within us, within our organization. How can we help you do what you need to do? How can we support you? There are such great needs out there. Let me just tell you something. Our first HBCU was established in 1837. That was 28 years before slavery ended. Before slavery ended. Cheney University, it's still around today. But it has problems, just like the rest of our HBCUs. which most of them were established right after the Civil War. So the late 1800s, 1865, 1867, Howard, 1868, Hampton, you know, but there we have challenges, but we've been around for that long, and for that long, we have also been underfunded, undervalued, and yet we continue to produce. Yet we continue to outproduce in so many ways. When you look at the economic and social mobility of the Black community, it is because of HBCUs. Whether or not you went to an HBCU or not, somebody in your family went there and somebody got you there. So there's a connection. So, you know, we need help. I get it. I stayed in Winona Hall. You know, I get it. I stayed in these dorms. They're not the best. I get it. You know, sometimes we don't get the responses right away. I get that. But you know what? I also worked on PWIs. I worked on our Research One universities, and they too had those problems. And so just understand that, you know, we tend to expect a lot more out of ourselves, which is not a bad thing at all, and have greater requirements of ourselves than we normally would have on other campuses. And so, you know, again, that's not a bad thing, but understand that you might be dealing with an HBCU, but those same issues and challenges happen on some of our larger, predominantly white institutions. And if they aren't happening, if it's not a matter of infrastructure, it's because they're getting all the research dollars and they're able to raise money and build new buildings because they don't have to worry about bringing in researchers and paying that astronomical cost, because we're paying for it with our tax dollars. So
That's right.
I don't know if I don't know if that's a good note to end on, but you know, it takes a village.
It sounds like we could come back and have a whole conversation about endowments and all of that stuff as well, though. Sustainability. So no, this has been an amazing conversation and just scratches the surface. We are super excited to continue these conversations and our partnerships with both of you all. And we might have to revisit this another year from now and see where we're at. As we close out, I just want to remind folks a few more webinars coming up from the Hunt Institute. Tuesday, February 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have a conversation about lessons from the Divine Nine, how Black Greek life impacts education, leadership, and policy. So just want to name that tangentially related to this conversation, but we know the Divine Nine and HBCU fraternities and sororities have had a crucial impact on society as well. So I want to draw your attention to that. In March, Postsecondary Pathways will be back with a conversation around supporting learners who are impacted by the legal system. In April, we'll have a conversation around Title IX and recent changes that have happened there. And then in May, we will talk about education deserts. So we're excited for lots of different discussions that are coming your way. If you have questions, you can find us on Twitter. Also find us at huntinstitute.org. But Dr. Trent, Dr. Mosby, we really appreciate you being here with us today. And we look forward to talking with you all soon. Everyone have a great day.